Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Skeindeer Knits. I have previously many times been asked if I can do a video talking about how I podcast, and I am going to do that for the entirety of this video, but I'm also going to share a lot of my thoughts about the podcaster audience interactions. It's going to be some hard truths in here, some things that I think it might be good to just know, like some unspoken rules that maybe some people don't know, and then it causes a kerfuffle. So it's not all going to be lovey-dovey and me going, make a podcast, but I will hopefully give you the knowledge and wisdom to make a podcast. So here we go. I thought I'd kick things off by talking about equipment and my setup. So I have a tripod. That was one of the first purchases I made for this podcast in particular. That was a great investment. I'm so glad I did it. I did my first maybe 1 or 2 episodes putting my camera in the window shelf, whatever you call it, window ledge. And that worked out, but it was very inflexible. Nowadays, I put my tripod right in the middle of my floor. It seems to be the best place to get the best light and backdrop, and I love the freedom I have to just move my camera wherever I need to. Also the freedom to put my camera quite high up. Not only is it quite flattering, but it highlights my eyes. Even if my eyes wander off, you sort of feel a sense of connecting to me. So I think having a tripod is worth the investment. And I say investment, they are not expensive. I have had takeouts that have cost more than this tripod. Mine is the Hama tripod, H-A-M-A. I got the cheapest one I could find with good ratings on Amazon. Though I do suggest supporting brick and mortar shops. I just thought I'd mention how easy and cheap it can be to get a tripod, and it's worth it. Now, as for camera, I have a Canon G7X, and it's kind of a running joke. Every time podcasters meet up, be it at a yarn festival or elsewhere, we just get stuck in a fit of giggles because we all have the same camera. And I want to talk a little bit about cameras, because this was like the main catalyst of me wanting to make this video, is that I really want to discourage those of you who want to start a video podcast from getting the fanciest of equipment. Do not. Often getting fancy equipment actually means that it's unsuitable for what you want to do. This camera that I use, and I'm not sponsored, I'm just a fan because it totally does the job. It is very suitable for vlogging. I'm pretty sure it's made for vloggers and, you know, kind of the selfie generation. It has a flip up screen so that I can see myself when I record, and it's so close to where the lens is that actually looks like I'm looking at you guys, so that's pretty good. And it fits my tripod, which most cameras do. I don't know what else to say. It's compact, I can bring it anywhere, and it fits recording at home. What's more is that the autofocus is pretty good. Yes, I know us podcasters complain about, oh, focus all the time. It's actually really good. It's silent. A lot of high-end cameras will have an autofocus that makes noise and often goes in and out and in and out at every little movement you make. It's so fine-tuned, it actually becomes disruptive when you record. And so often I have seen podcasts recorded with 2 fancy cameras, and it doesn't actually turn out to be the best product in the end, because the camera isn't really well suited. So get a more vlogging optimized handheld camera, or even use your phone. I mean, I know great video podcasters that got to their successive positions that they have today by using their phones. As an Android fan, I do have to confess that iPhones do have the better cameras, and you'll be better off there. I don't think I'd be happy recording with my Samsung, but there you go. I really don't recommend going any fancier than a phone or a handheld, personally. There are better cameras, of course, and I've seen some really good production qualities, but they are not necessary no matter how pretty those videos are. So I do want to discourage anyone who is hesitating about starting a podcast because they don't have the best equipment to not worry. As for sound, that is another thing that I have a lot of feelings about. I find the sound on this camera to be perfectly tolerable. When I was first editing a video I did with this camera, I was so hyper focused on the noise. I thought it was way too much noise. I needed an external microphone and it was so bad. Turns out it's actually something we just screen out when we watch videos. If you pay attention, you're gonna find a bit of noise on every video you watch, but we sort of managed to screen it out because our laptops make the same kind of noise when we watch. There's always a bit of noise around us. It really doesn't matter. However, having purely crisp sound where all you hear is someone's voice can be a bit too intimate, and often people do choose to have external microphones. They may have a small one attached here, or something just outside the frame, something external. I'm not a fan personally. Again, that's me going against the idea of high-end equipment, because it makes it a little bit intimate, because not only can you hear the person's voice, you can hear every movement they make with their cheeks and their tongue, and you just sort of, you don't need that. I think, yeah, it feels like they're talking in your ear. So I prefer having my microphone quite, far away from me and speak up above the noise, rather than having a lot of noise and talking like that, because you don't want your flatmates to hear that you're recording. Now you're hearing the noise a lot more than if I talk a bit louder. So that's another side note. Make sure you record when nobody's home if you can. I know that's really hard. If you have flatmates, if you have a family that are home when you record, it's really difficult, but I would recommend it for your peace of mind. But understandably, that's not always the case. I am lucky that I can work from home as a student, so when my flatmates are out working, I record. As for lights, I have both relied on daylight and studio lights. Today I'm relying on daylight, and that is really the best option you have. If you have a north-facing window, being on the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere is obviously the other way around, where you don't get direct sunlight, that is the best. That is the best light you can possibly have. Direct daylight, indirect sunlight. It's so flattering and natural. You don't get like too red or too blue or anything. It's really good, and most cameras are optimized for it, whereas indoor light can vary so much. I do, however, have a south-facing window, so I get a lot of sunlight coming in and out. It looks to be fairly stable today. It's pretty good. But I have bought a light box that I also got from the also famous Amazon. It didn't cost me that much. I could not afford two, I don't think. So it's a bit stark. You get very high contrast in your face, or you flatten your face out. It's really hard to find the middle ground there. But it's nice, and it was, like I said, fairly affordable, like 20 something pounds. And I have enough floor space to keep it at a certain distance from me, so that makes it a bit more flattering as well, and it accurately presents the color of the yarns I'm showing off. So you can get studio light, but for the vast majority of my episodes I have not used studio lights, and I don't think you need to either. So really what you need is just a good phone camera or handheld camera and a tripod. But what about the backdrop, Ellie? What about the backdrop? You have such nice backdrops. So this is my bedroom. But my bedroom could easily be mistaken for a craft studio. So there's always a backdrop that would be useful. There's the focus. No camera is perfect, but it's all right. I'm lucky I actually have two suitable backdrops now. There's one with this shelf and lots of yarny things and a little sheet pal in it. And there's like the other yarn shelf. But really, you just have to use what you have around you. You can obviously try to make a backdrop that is deliberately nice for your podcast. I would recommend just using whatever you have. I don't see the point in trying to make a particularly nice backdrop, because that's not really what people are there for. It is nice with a little extra, but I wouldn't think about that in the beginning, quite frankly. Sometimes my bed is my backdrop. And for me, that's kind of showing that I'm not selling anything more than what I have to give, if that makes sense. That's a terrible way of phrasing it. It's important for me to show at what level I am producing this, because sometimes people can come to expect a lot from how fancy your setup is, and if it looks very professional, people often expect you to do more, to be more, and you don't really want to communicate that you are making something you aren't. So for me, it's important to show I am recording from my bedroom. I live in a flat share. I can't control the light. This is as professional as this podcast gets. That is why it's out here for free. So I think it's important to actually level your production level to where you are at, to not give a false impression of what you're doing. Hope that makes sense. As for planning, I tend to I wake up in the morning and I, you know, wash my face, brush my teeth, put my makeup on, and while I do all those things, I do my show outline, which is also my show notes. I managed to keep them both the same, that way I save time and effort. A lot of podcasters are very unhappy about having to make show notes and find that people often don't read them, so what's the point? So I try to just make them the same. I have a Word document for every episode, and one is often an alteration of the last week, so I will open up the Word document for last week's show note and alter it to fit today. So I will remove some links and add some links and comments and maybe some things in red that I will remember for myself but remove when I actually put the show note up there on my YouTube video description. Really try to economize your time and effort on this one. It's not worth to write stuff you're going to say out in detail. It would often make your video seem a bit more rigid and planned, and often people can tell if you are reading rather than speaking organically. So I strongly recommend to just operate from bullet points and use those bullet points as your show notes, because they usually hold enough information for people to find stuff. And I include links in those so that, yeah. And often in your Word document, you can put things in various colors and bold and italics and underline, which it doesn't translate into your description on your YouTube video when you copy and paste. So that's a sneaky little tip there. But I do urge you to prioritize the order of the things you are telling people. You may be bursting with something personal to share, but I urge you to put that last. I don't always do that because obviously having done this for 70 something videos, I can assume that people watching may be invested enough to want to hear it, but as a general rule I do put that at the end of the video, so my order is pretty predictable. It's the general introduction of saying who I am, where you can find me, wishing people welcome, and maybe updating those that are regular for what's different or those that are new for what to expect, and then going through the admin, which is usually knit alongs for me, maybe new pattern releases or something like that. Any sort of announcements that need to be made up front. Then you can go into what you have been knitting, so you could order it by works in progress and finished objects, the other way around. Maybe things you want to cast on, you can talk about what you want to do. You don't have to stick to this format whatsoever, this is just what I do. And once you've covered all of that, it's good to do acquisitions last, because people have very mixed opinions about that. Some people love to see what other people have bought themselves and what other people have given them, but others feel like that's something they need to stray away from because they have a tendency to over purchase yarn and stuff. So I think it's good to put that at the end so that that's optional content. And at the very end of that, for people who are only there for the knitting and yarn specific stuff, you put your personal stuff. So even if you were bursting to tell people about that in the beginning, be like, sorry, I've been away for so long, but this and this and this and that happened, you can say that that's something you will cover, but more on that at the end of the episode. I think that's just good to presenting in an order of relevance to the average viewer, even if of course your personal stuff is the most relevant to you personally. I found that works for me. It seems to work for a lot of people, and of course I'm sure lots of people wonder, how do you seem natural when you record? I don't have a good answer to that, and now that I'm conscious of it, I'm like, awkward. It is awkward because you're on your own in an empty room with a camera and you're trying to talk as if you're talking to a person. Hopefully you have a lot of practice from talking to people, because you can use that. I find it really helps to actually see myself on the little screen above my lens, so that I am sort of talking to a person, me. So that really helps to just have someone else to look at. And I really strongly encourage you to find a setup that means that you can see yourself. Make sure you are in focus and the cutout frame is nice in a way that makes it look like you're looking at the camera and not there. Not that your mirror, for instance, is there, or have your face on the screen but the camera there, something like that. It can seem very off. People often respond badly to that, even though I would argue that, you know, you do you and it's none of their business, but it's an advice I can give, and it's fine if you choose not to take that, I think. I also have some opinions on the outline. If you have a good enough camera, it will show you 4 lines. So cutting your picture into 9 areas, 2 going down and 2 going across. Try to get your eyes on the top line. I'm kind of doing that right now, but try not to cut off your head either. So this is perfect, I think. And also my face is kind of along the other line, so this really works out. Like now that this eye is in like the crossing point between the two, my chin is just at the bottom line. That's really good. Of course, now it's very rigid. I try to keep my face still, so you can kind of go a bit off, you know, but try to stay somewhere close to that. If your face is too far down here, it seems very odd. If your face is too up here, it seems very odd. If you're all the way to the side, obviously strange. So try to use a bit of photography wisdom there to put your face in a reasonable area of the frame. Obviously, this is not essential knowledge at all. Another really big advice I could give to anyone: do it all in one take and know with yourself that you can edit later. I have so many daft moments. I just hit record and start talking, and I say something, and then I start looking at the window and I start thinking, and I take a sip of my drink and I look at my screen, I check my show notes all the time, and I just cut it out. It's become automatic now, and I make sure I'm not saying anything important as I'm looking away. Sometimes I forget that and it looks a bit off. I'm just going to include that because it's not that formal. But a general advice is do it all in one take, so you don't have to go, said something, oh, stop recording, start recording, say something else, stop recording, think what you're going to say something else, oh, you should have recorded, and then you record, and then you say that thing. It's going to disrupt the fluency. So I instead suggest doing it all in one take, and often if things come out wrong, I often get my words jumbled and mixed up because I have a short verbal memory span. I have to say things quickly to remember them, but as I say things quickly, and then I have to say them again. And so often in the video you will find me say the same phrase 3 times in a row, and obviously only one of them will have been included, and that's just how it is. I would love to have a unedited clip for you guys available, but that feels very raw. I don't feel like doing that, so hope you just believe me on that. And related to the one take advice is to have an extra battery. With my Canon G7X camera, the battery time is really poor. It lasts for an hour at most, so the best purchase I've ever made for this camera, aside from the tripod, it's an extra battery. And the Canon cameras are hugely expensive, but they are pretty good knockoff batteries out there. Just saying. So this is how you know I'm not sponsored. So I recommend having at least 2 batteries at hand, one in the camera and one on the charger. I could often use 3. Like last week when I did 3 videos in one go, I could definitely have used a 3rd one. I mean, this battery could run out at any point and the other battery is still charging, because the Canon batteries take ages to charge. So you heard me mentioning editing. And editing, I think, is a big scare for people. I don't have many comforting words to say about that. I happen to have been trained in Adobe Premiere, so I use that. It's completely overkill and you don't need that kind of fancy equipment. What did I just say about fancy equipment? It's overkill. Premiere is overkill. I'm sure you would do fine with Windows Movie Maker, although in my days that was not a very good software. I hope it has improved, but I do know that people on Macs are the lucky ones, because what's it called, iMovie? It's pretty good. And if you want something fancier, you can upgrade to Final Cut Pro, I believe. So yeah, the Mac editing softwares are really the best ones right now, but I'm a Windows girl, so it's a bit trickier then. But there are video editing software out there. Doesn't really matter so much which one you use, I don't think. It's just good to edit. I initially, when I started podcasting, I thought the reason I was going to do this is because it's not going to take that long. I don't need to edit. I see lots of other knitting podcasts that don't edit. Why should I? And I realized I was not happy with my own product, not editing it. So I realized in the end I have to edit. That is so important for me to record and feel relaxed as I do, because I know that anything I say or do that is a bit off, I can take out. And I wish that was a thing I could do in real life. Anyway, related to that, what can you put in your video? What can you legally speaking put in there? Really, you can only legally speaking put in your own content. Be very careful about music. I often go have a YouTube search for royalty-free music, and most of the time that music is royalty-free. Sometimes they revoke the license of you being able to use it as much as you please, and so I put that song into my video and put my ad revenue on, which I'll get back to, and I'm told that someone else is cashing out from my ad revenue because it's not my song to use. I'm like, but it's royalty free. What? And as it turns out, they have revoked that license, so now they want to have the rights back after you put them on the video. It is really upsetting. So be very careful about what you include in your videos. I don't have a very foolproof guide to do that. I'm still learning. But the best way forward is really to just use your own content. Something you've recorded maybe from street musicians, if they let you. And that's actually an additional note on the Mac editing softwares. There is some pretty good music that you can use. The Adobe software that I use doesn't really have any preset that's any good. You're really working from scratch, and that's why I don't think it's a good software. So I do not recommend the software that I myself use. Now, I was talking about ad revenue. And I have lots of thoughts and feelings about ad revenue. I want to discourage anyone from thinking that that is a good reason to start being a YouTuber. You have to be very, very, very popular to have any meaningful revenue. I'm not saying I haven't earned anything from running ads in my videos, but it's not enough to justify doing this. You have to want to do this for the sake of itself. Switching on the ads for me was purely just a way to justify the time I put in to do this, rather than say teach for university, or you know, the postage that I pay every time I send out a prize or anything like that. Now, I'm not going to say how much I've earned from my ad revenue, but I have had it on for about a year now, and the amount of money I've made could pay just a bit more than 2 months worth of rent. That is about an hourly rate of £2.50 to £3, assuming I make a video each week. It's not worth doing this for the ad revenue. I'm telling you right now, you are just not going to make enough to make that work. I think that, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, an hourly rate of £2 to £3 is just not great. So ad revenue can be good to justify some expenses and time you make, but it doesn't really justify all of it. So it can't be the sole reason why you do this. And it's something to carefully consider enabling. Now, the last thing I have left after editing is exporting and then uploading. And while you upload, you can edit the description of your video, so you can really have it ready as soon as it's been uploaded properly. All of this, I'm going to give you a good summary of how long all of this takes. So the prep in the morning, I mean, I do a lot of stuff that anyone does in the morning, so I'm going to subtract that and say it takes me about 1 hour to prepare myself and show notes and the setup. 1 hour. And then it takes about an hour or two to record. So I'm going to say 3 hours altogether now. Then it takes about 3 hours to edit. I usually start editing about 9 and then I'm done about noon. So 6 hours. It will take you about 3 hours to export an hour-long video. We're up to 9 hours, and then there's the 1 hour of uploading, depending on your speed of your internet connection. So we have 10 hours per video. 10 hours each week if you choose to do a weekly podcast series. If someone told me it would take me that long, if I had to invest that much time on this podcast, I'd probably not do it. So I'm sorry to have to give you the bad news, but I don't really have time to spend 10 hours every week. But it's sort of something I've become invested in now, and it's giving me a lot of joy. So happy to keep doing it, but be aware it takes a long time. And surely you might think, oh, I just spend less time preparing, I will record quicker, I will not edit. That will affect your product more than it's worth, I'd say. There's a lot of stuff I would discard. Yeah, you can prep a bit shorter. You don't have to prepare for that long, I suppose. You could try to be a bit more efficient when recording. I'm not that efficient, so fair point. You can condense that probably down to an hour and a half. So 3 hours down to an hour and a half. You still have to edit. I'm sorry, that's just, if you want your content to be easily digestible, unless you are a lot more fluent at talking than I am, then yeah, editing is very important. But some people are just, yeah, more fluent, or they have more experience, so maybe they can condense that time as well. But for me personally, it does take 10 hours. So that is 10 hours per week. But do you have to do this weekly? Do you want to do it more? Do you want to do it less? I have a lot of thoughts about that, but the main thing when you are new at podcasting is be consistent, be predictable, have an uploading schedule. I had one when I started off. It was always every, I think, Thursday. Then I changed it to every Friday, and now I'm a bit like once a week. It will usually be a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. It seems to work out for me, and the less, well, the more I've done this, the less regular I have to be, because you get people who are invested in what you do. In the beginning, being consistent about how often you upload is very important, and I actually want to discourage you from uploading too much. Lots of people do that. They have a different format than the 1 week or every other week or once a month format, and they will do shorter but more videos. And for some people that work fine. I find that very difficult to keep up with as someone who watches those. So if I see someone put up a video again and again, I'm like, oh my god, I'm so behind. I've got so many videos of that person to catch up, even though they're like 5 minutes each. I'm sure lots of you may have felt that when I last week had 3 videos at once, and this week I'll have 2 at once, and suddenly you are behind on 5 videos. So I would discourage making too much, but obviously you have to make enough for people to remember you. So weekly or bi-weekly is by far what I will recommend. If you do it on a monthly basis, people could easily interpret or misinterpret that as you actually not being that committed, that you're not going to be a regular, that you're just trying it out. You're less likely to get people to follow you, which is kind of unfair, but it's one of those harsh truths of this thing. So the most important thing is to be consistent. And then is the question of how do you get your videos out there? And I don't really have a good answer to that, because I wasn't really part of the community when I started, which was one of the biggest mistakes that I made, and I will get back to that at the end of this video. I can give you some advice of what not to do. Don't ask people to check out your podcast. Don't contact other podcasters and say, hey, check out my podcast. Don't send out invite to your Ravelry group for your podcast. Don't push people into your podcast. You need to let people find your podcast on their own, because otherwise, I don't know what it is. It's something psychologically where we just aren't as inclined to check it out and even like it, even if we otherwise would. I don't know what that is about, but in general, I want to tell you, as a podcaster, we are very busy. We've been in the scene for a while, so we require a lot of podcasts that we are trying to keep up with. And for me, it's very difficult to add another podcast to that list just because someone said, hey, check out my podcast. Because of course you want people to check out your podcast. I want people to check out my podcast too. And it's like, I don't have time. I would if I could, and I'm just, So asking people to watch it is unfortunately not the way, even though it seems like the most obvious thing to do. So I would just advise you to join the community and hope that people find your podcast other ways. You know, take part in other podcasters group, genuinely, not as a way to discover your podcast, but as a way of just connecting, to make friends, to be part of the community. I have no idea people do this because I'm awful at social media, but that is a general way of starting off from a high place, as if you already know people in the Instagram community, for instance. But overall, if there's one thing I can tell you that is sadly one of those harsh truths, do not expect to be a success overnight. And yes, for some who have watched me for a long time will know that I was also a bit let down in the beginning because I could not find a viewership, and I've deliberately kept that up there so that you can see that everyone has a hard time in the beginning to just be noticed, to get people to watch their podcast, and it's a slow process, and you're just gonna have to accept that it's a slow process, and the snowball will start rolling and more people will notice and take recommendations from others. They will probably take other people's recommendations to watch your podcast more so than your own recommendation to watch your own podcast. It's kind of how it is. So yeah, take it slow. Don't expect things to be successful right away. Don't give up too soon, and be consistent, and don't break that continuum that you then have made for yourself by recording that regularly. Don't start all over again and be like, oh, I don't know. Show people that you have faith in your product as well. So I said that this all takes 10 hours. Well, that's a bit of a lie. The 10 hours are nothing compared to the time you now have to invest now that your videos are up there and you are forming a community around your videos. The social aspect is by far the biggest time suck of this entire experience, and if you're not up for that, you're gonna have a hard time. And I am having a hard time sometimes because I want to say highly introverted and easily overwhelmed. And I can tell you right now, you will get a lot of private messages and you will get overwhelmed. The thing about internet that is different from real life is that one person is just one person, and in real life, a horde of people coming towards you, each individual in that horde will see one another and realize this is a lot. When someone does that online, they will only see themselves. They won't see the big group, the big bombardment of contact, of information, and they won't necessarily see you get overwhelmed. So they won't necessarily put up maybe those boundaries that they would have done in real life. So you kind of have to give people a bit of the benefit of the doubt, even though you are feeling overwhelmed, and you will feel overwhelmed. Some advice I can give is to direct people to a place where they can contact you to alleviate your inbox. I deal very poorly with private messages. Often a lot of the private messages that I receive, no matter how kind and generous and lovely they are often not necessary given the sheer amount I have to sort through of very important messages of a professional nature, alongside people who just want to say hi and don't know where else to do it. And so for that purpose, I strongly recommend directing them to somewhere else. I personally choose to open a Ravelry group where I can direct them, because things get a bit more organized and where people have introduced themselves has its own thread, so I can go there and actually read those introductions and have them all in one space instead of scattered around an inbox with all sorts of information. If people have questions, they can ask them there, and if I can't help them as quickly as they need help, they can help each other. And I'm often not, you know, meant to be a knitting help desk, and so even that is the thing I can offer in that group where everyone's helping each other out. So do give people a means of contact even if you can't bear the direct contact. Now, don't blame you if you can't, because I don't know a single podcaster who does not get bogged down with messages and at some point in the knitting days don't know how to cope. And it's like, it's such like a first world problem, right? How, oh, poor you get people wanting to talk to you. That's like a problem I have never had my entire life. Usually nobody wants to talk to me. I'm like, and now it's so many and I have absolutely no way of dealing with this. And most of the time podcasters will not even do this full time, so they don't actually have enough time to answer, like practically speaking. So the other advice I can give is to make some very practical rules. Something you may have to repeat a lot, but it's good to have those guidelines. So I have these as my rules. I've said them before, but I try not to say them too much because it can sound a bit unfriendly to be like, don't ask me there. So my rules personally is to say the comment section on Instagram and YouTube is very casual. It's not the place for any professional inquiries or pattern support, but we just chat. Private messages on Instagram are just discouraged because it's a terrible platform in general. If you need to private message me, do it on Ravelry, but generally use my group because the inbox is very full and I mainly just need to keep that for very important things. So the group is the best place for community building, because yeah, there's no point in really just getting in touch with the podcaster. What makes sense is to talk so that you are connecting with both the podcaster and the other viewers that they have, because chances are you have just as much in common with the other viewers as the podcaster themselves. So yeah, do set up some rules for yourself once you find that it becomes a bit too much, and say this is where I will respond and this is where I will respond, and please post things in that place. It does matter where you get your information, and you will notice that in time. Your phone will start buzzing non-stop for a while and you will need to balance out what you have on notifications and whatnot, and you find your balance. I think that's my main advice, find your balance. But please already be prepared that people will ask stuff you said before. People don't always read, people don't always listen, and it can be frustrating, and you kind of have to just give them the benefit of the doubt. But I do also want to urge everyone watching now to, if you aren't paying attention, that's fine. I don't always pay attention when I watch podcasts. I don't always pay attention when I have YouTube running. But if I'm gonna leave a comment, I make sure that I have paid attention so I don't make a fool of myself. Obviously I don't ever think that someone has made a fool of themselves, it's just kind of how critical I am of myself. But maybe have that mean little one on your shoulder that just go, have you misunderstood something now? You know, because it can be very stressful, I think, for podcasters to find that something they said or something they didn't say is being picked on in the comment section. I think a glorious example of this was when Amy Florence was announcing the name change of my pattern, and she hadn't mentioned it right away. So as soon as she said the old name of the pattern, she got bombarded with comments of people who hadn't listened, because in the next 5 minutes or less she would say that the name had changed. And it's so frustrating when you have said something and you still find it doesn't make a difference what you say, and that can be very frustrating. And I think maybe you just have to live that frustration to understand. But I do urge you, future podcaster, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't often read things as they read, because sometimes people just aren't that socially aware and don't often think of how they may come across. Sometimes people come across as unintentionally creepy, and you kind of, yes, protect yourself, but sometimes they just don't realize that that's what they do. I've had people comment on some very personal things of podcasters when they meet them in real life, and probably didn't consider that, oh, that's actually a little bit odd. And as I said earlier, there is no individual who is deliberately trying to overwhelm you. It's just that when you get all those little tiny comments and messages, and you make a compound of those in your head, you feel overwhelmed. But each individual hasn't seen that, they don't know. And often they can seem very intense, even though that's not intentional from their side. But you so feel like, as you read the comments, that they're like latching themselves onto your leg, and they're like the zombies in The Walking Dead. And usually that's obviously not the case, but it can still feel that way. It's like, yeah, I want to urge people to consider how the things that they write may come across, but also urge those of us, you know, people in my position, to often consider that probably, you know, that's not what they meant, that's not the place they're coming from. It's tiresome, but it's the best thing to kind of bridge the very different places we're coming from, the person podcasting, the person watching or listening. Another thing that will happen, and the more episodes you make, the more this will happen, is that people will start commenting on very old videos. I get people commenting on videos that are nearly 2 years old, expecting me to know what happens in every minute of that video, and commenting on something like, oh, I like that color, nice mittens. So what do you mean? I'm sorry, I don't remember what I said in, I don't know, October 2016. I just don't. I'm not gonna go back and watch an hour-long video of myself every time I get one of those comments. Old videos, as far as I'm concerned, are old. And actually I would have probably disabled the comment section if it weren't for the fact that that will delete, or at least hide, make invisible the comments that are already there. Because for me, I appreciate the correspondence I've had there at the time, and I don't want to remove that. But it would be actually very convenient if YouTube would let me disable making comments there in the future, because it makes no sense for me to get comments on, I don't know, a Christmas video now that it's June. And I even had that, someone watching all my videos back to back, and that is so flattering. But they kept commenting on each and every one. So the first one was like, oh, you seem so happy today. And then an hour later they'd watch the next video and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry you're not feeling well. And then they'd watch the next video, same day, and be like, oh, I'm glad you're feeling better now. Yeah. I don't know if I have any encouraging words for that. It will frustrate you that people think you're real time. I think one thing though that really gets to me, and maybe it shouldn't, but I feel like it's worth mentioning, and that is, people often want to help, and often that help results in unsolicited advice that often feel like you're being corrected. And I know I'm not alone in the podcaster sphere and feeling that. When you go through your comment section and you want to leave responses and likes and whatnot, you often feel like you're just being bombarded with criticism even though it's coming from the best of intentions and the best of places, where people go, oh, maybe you should do that, maybe you should put your tripod there and do your lights that way, or maybe your hair should be this way and possibly your knitting should have changed to be that way, when you actually didn't ask for any advice. And it's coming from the kindest of places. But it's so much, and you know, every week someone's gonna say you should ... And I do want to ask again, those leaving comments, as much as I appreciate your intentions to help, is to again consider your comments in a bigger context. And I try to remember this myself when I comment on other people's podcasts, because remember, I'm a podcast watcher too, and I have made all the rookie mistakes. And just remember the context your comment comes in, or everyone in the comment section commenting on how the light was in the episode, or everyone commenting on the weird sound in the background. Just, you know, it's a piece of advice there. But I do find it very difficult when people feel like they are entitled to comment on every little aspect of the video. So if you're starting to podcast and you find that you get a lot of that, you may just have to speak up about it, but you also may just have to accept that that's what it is, and again, give people the benefit of the doubt. So those were things that you may just have to be forgiving of, but there is also a little short bullet list here of things not to be forgiving about, and I'm gonna be very blunt about this. There's really no way around it. People do not get to dictate your content. Even me right here and now, when I give you this how to podcast guide, don't let anyone ever tell you what you can and cannot do in your podcast. I got kind of personal in my Vlogmas, and I had someone tell me, maybe you should just stick to your knitting. Do not let people do that. I'm just saying right now, this is your podcast and you do exactly what you want. Nobody has done anything to be entitled to watch you, to tell you what to do, so don't ever let anyone do that. You do what you want. You are not serving anyone. You're just putting your content out there. If people like it, they can watch. If they don't like it, they don't have to. They can find something they like. So if that's the one and only thing you take away from this episode, I hope that's that thing. As a related thing to that, please remember, dear future podcaster, that you are not other people's promotion tool. People may want to send you things, and that is super nice, and I find it so generous and I get very excited every time, but nobody gets to expect you to promote what they want to give you. And often you will meet people in real life who think that by forming a relationship with you, you have to promote whatever they do that is related. You don't. Do it if you want to, but you should probably not form friendships on the basis of that. I had this happen very early in my podcast days. I got friends, and I am a person who gets very excited when I make friends. I'm in this to make friends. I am not the person who finds it easier to make friends. So when people show signs that they want to be friends with me, I get very excited and happy, and I feel very grateful. And I become very disappointed when I have found out or suspected and had it confirmed that that person wasn't going to be friends with Ellie. They wanted to be friends with Skeindeer. And it sounds so preposterous to just think that people want that, because who am I to say that? I have 10k subscribers on YouTube. That's nothing. It's nothing. And that's why I want to tell these people as well. I'm not popular enough to befriend on that basis, honestly. I was gonna say go befriend Zoella or whatever, but really, she also deserves real friends. So yeah, while it may sound unbelievable that someone would do that, it happens. I've talked to all the podcasters as well, and it happens. You just have to protect yourself, honestly. And related to what I said before, people will pick on you and give unsolicited advice. And yes, I said that a lot of those things are things you will have to be forgiving of and give people the benefit of the doubt. But please do draw your boundaries and say when enough is enough, when you don't think people are allowed to say certain things. Like I had someone commenting, oh, I really like your videos and it's such nice that you talk about color work and stuff, but I can't bear watching you because you keep using the word yeah too much. Well, then get lost, because I'm gonna say the word yeah as much as I like. Did you know that in Norway we use the word ja as like a filler word? Like yeah, it can mean yes, but it also goes kind of just so yeah, no, yeah, the weather, eh? So it just kind of comes natural to me to put in the word yeah ever so often. And nobody gets to tell me otherwise, and nobody gets to tell me to not do that. And so for you as well, draw your boundaries and don't let people just pick on anything that you do. But as I said before, at some extent you just have to appreciate that people want to help, and that's really cool. It's about finding that balance within yourself and acknowledge with yourself that you often know best for yourself. But it is also worth pointing out that people will feel entitled to you. And this is a difficult thing for me to describe properly, and I think it is particularly relevant to females here on YouTube. I think men are a bit more protected just from kind of cultural reasons. I'm not going to get into that, but often the more you share, the more entitled people will feel about what you do. And when you choose not to share, if you choose to take a break, there might be reactions because people feel they are entitled to know what you're doing, what you're up to, and it's not really okay. And often people don't realize that they have that entitlement. They think it's coming from a place of caring, and again, you have to some extent give people the benefit of the doubt, but also protect yourself. It's a common theme here. But I would suggest, if someone asks, you know, about something personal in your life, know that you yourself can just say, I am not going to talk about that. You don't have to say, I'm not going to talk about that, because you can stop. I'm not going to talk about that. Full stop. Try it. It's kind of liberating. I myself decided about a year ago to just tone down the personal stuff in this podcast. I was sort of ready actually to get more personal, involve more of other people in my life, and I even had a friend of mine guesting the podcast in September, and it was shortly after that where I was just, you know what, personal life and personal details will only be included at the bare minimum. Going into more detail than that about anything or anyone, I'm just not going to do. And so again, I want to say, just draw your boundaries and decide what to share and what not to share. And I have personally chosen to share a very minimal stuff about my life, stuff that I'm up to, people that I know and have in my life. Just, yeah, protect yourself. And there went the battery. So related to what I said earlier, always good to have an extra battery. If I hadn't had that extra battery fully charged by now, I'd have to wait for more than an hour to be able to continue recording. So please prepare that way up front. Now, I was talking about people feeling entitled to you, and I could go into lots of details, but it's hard to do that without using examples. And I don't want to use examples because I understand that people come from the most well-intended places, and it's often stuff that's happened more to other podcasters than myself, and I haven't asked permission to share these things, so I'm just not going to. But in general, be aware that people may feel a sense of ownership to you because they feel like they have formed a relationship with you as a podcaster, because they have been in your room for so many times and had that one-way conversation with you. But podcasters are not your friend, because it is just a one-way street. I remember way before I produced my own videos, I used to watch a lot of popular YouTubers. I watched Carrie Fletcher's among others, and I remember she had to frequently make this proclamation that YouTubers are not your friends, and I thought, that's like, that doesn't sound very nice, and I don't know, like, I know I don't know you, why do you have to say that? And oh boy, now I understand why people feel they have to say that, because there are people that generally think that they are your friends and are entitled to, say, meeting you when you go traveling. I go traveling a lot, and sometimes people have just been like expecting that they're gonna meet me. Unless I go to a particular yarn event where I am showing up as Skeindeer, then no, actually, no. I may not have a meetup. Why would I? I may also do it, you know, but nobody's entitled to it. That's my point. The entitlement is a bit problematic, not the want to be social and meet people. That is always lovely, and it's one of those things that I enjoy the most about this. But yeah, I often do get people who, because they hear me talk so much to them in these videos, often expect me to talk to them in any way and form. And it's been anything from, you know, expecting Skype conversations to phone calls to making me their tour guide. I'm just not in that business. And if you want a tour guide, you probably should contact a tourist center. And there are also other incidents that I know me and other podcasters have experienced, where if we are in our private lives And we're talking again, podcasters. We are not on internet scales very popular, but in the knitting world, apparently, people think it's sometimes okay to just casually photograph us. Like, no coming up to us and say, hey, can I get a photo? That is great. I love that. It's so nice to just, you know, it's an icebreaker to start talking even if I'm not like the most photogenic person in the world. I think that's nice. But if someone just walks into a yarn shop where I'm at and every time I look up, they stare at me, but they never make contact. And I look up and they stare at me, and I look up and they stare at me, and suddenly I see a camera facing towards me. I think that may be a good example of the entitlement that I find a bit worrisome sometimes. Don't know if you can hear all the voices outside, but hey, I live in central London. You just have to kind of accept that your surroundings are when you record. And yeah, there will be people that are pissed off that there are noise when you record, and there will be people that are pissed off that you say, apologies for the noise, there's nothing I can do about that, or say, thank you for tolerating the noise that's around me. I think that relates to that entitlement, I'm afraid, and I'm very glad that I have mentioned it, and hopefully it helps to have made some awareness around that, and maybe other people have some thoughts about that you can of course leave in the comment section below. And related to what I said earlier, you have to be aware of what you share, because once it's up, it's up. And you know, last year I was going through some really tough stuff that I am still partially going through, and it was so tempting sometimes to speak up about all of it here, because I was just so full of just being completely overwhelmed by it. But I'm glad I didn't, because yes, I would be able to vent, but I will also have to deal with all of the viewpoints and opinions other people have about my personal struggles, and that may not be what you need. So please be aware of what you put up, because it's not just going to be up this week and next week. It will be up years from now, and people will go back and find that thing that you said back then and be like, oh, I can't believe you said that, or anything else. So usually if a video is up, it's up. You can take the whole video down, but you can't take down pieces of it. And now I've talked a lot about the personal and interpersonal stuff, because there is so much personhood, you know, you podcast as yourself with your name in your face and your surroundings, but there's also the professional aspect of what you share, so you need to be very aware of who and what you endorse. If you've been given something for free, you have to state that you got those things for free, because otherwise it's unmarked advertisement, which may or may not be legal in your country. I know in Norway I am breaking the law if I don't say that this is something that was given to me for free, because that is the same as paying something to endorse something. So even though I'm not in Norway, I still try to stick to that rule and say I was given this for free. Related to that, make sure that the ones or the things that you endorse is something you can stand by, because even though you have absolutely nothing to do with this product or these people, if something goes wrong, that could affect you because you endorsed that thing. It's super frustrating because it was nothing to do with you, but here you are being blamed for some other person's whatever that happened. So you need to be very careful. It's not just playing around, it's not just fun and games. It's the adult world, I'm afraid, and it's media, and you have to be careful. So that was a lot of things that is partially positive, partially not so positive, and I hope it has given you some ideas and educated you and given you some food for thought. Another thing I really want to stress is, what are the reasons you want to podcast? You need to ask yourself some very tough questions. Why do you want to do this? What is it that you wish to achieve? And what is it that you can add to the already existing podcasting scene? How can you change it? What can you supplement with? What do you have that is different? I think the most common reason that I see around is, oh, I just want to join the community. And that is the completely valid reason. That was my reason too. But as I alluded to earlier, in hindsight, that was probably not the best reason, because really the best way to get viewerships is if you're already in the community. And what do I mean when I say community? I don't mean being friends with the other podcasters. That's not what it's about. That's not what brings you forward. Being mentioned helps, surely, it's definitely helped me. But what I mean by community is actually making friends with the other people that watch podcasts. If you're already communicating with one another and you follow one another, you can just post up on Instagram or something and say, hey, I've started a podcast too. And there you have it. So I was completely oblivious to the knitting social media. I just found some stuff on YouTube and I thought, hey, I want to do that too, and I started it, and I was very frustrated that I didn't know how to find viewers. And I even contacted some asking, do you guys know if there's like a registry or something? Like there's anywhere I could like submit my podcast to an official list? Anything? There isn't. What happens is that people will find you, and you just have to let them. You can engage with people, like I said earlier, but starting a podcast as your first point, from personal experience, not the best way. So starting a podcast with the objective to join the community is a bit backwards. Join the community first and then you can start a podcast. We can do it anyway, of course, you know what I mean. But yeah, I will say that joining the community with the podcast is good for the shy. I'm not very good at getting in touch with people. Pretty much all the relationships I've started because of this has by and large been because people have come up to me in real life or on the internet and said that they watch the podcast and like it, and our friendship starts from there. And that's how I gotten to know maybe other podcasters that you watch, or other designers and other people in the business, whatever they do knitting wise. So it can be good for the shy to like kind of get people to come up to you rather than the other way around, but it is quite passive. So I do still encourage you to start off maybe on Ravelry and on Instagram. The other reason being that you really have to be kind of on top of things. Now, I am not at all on top of social media, but I have to kind of know where it's at. So starting a podcast often does mean watching other podcasts, because can you imagine if I was like, so I've discovered this thing, it's called the Zweig sweater, I don't know if you've heard about it, I don't know, it's a design I found on Ravelry. If I did that, you would all go, really, Ellie? Really? Because everyone's talking about that sweater right now, you know? Or if I was like, so fun, it's like German short dress, have you tried? I always did wrap and turns, and then German short dress is the thing. I'm like, everyone knows about German short, not everyone, but if you kind of seem oblivious to stuff that all your viewers already know, they aren't really given any reasons to watch. And that sounds very harsh, but that's, yeah. But also depends on your target audience. Maybe your target audience is people that don't know about this stuff. You can have a different target audience. So, you know, I'm not saying do's and don'ts here. It's just kind of some loose thoughts I have. But in general, whilst you will be growing a community, it will be a shared one. You will rarely have monopoly on your own community. I share audience with most of the other podcasters. I find that people that comment on my podcast, they also comment on the other podcasts. You know, they're not monogamously attached to my podcast or anything. People tend to watch lots of podcasts and they are equally into all of them, or, you know, their top 5 or 10 or whatever. So do be aware of that as well. Like, you are sharing your crowd, and often that means just, yeah, take that into account, whatever it is that you are talking about. And that is also often how your podcast will be shared. It doesn't actually come so much down to being part of the community and even mentioned by others. It's the fact that people just recommend podcasts between themselves, and often when they watch the same podcast, it will come up on your recommendations. So having that shared community is a strength, I would argue. Lastly, are you making the podcast to sell something? Because if you are, that's okay. But 1, you need to be frank about that. And 2, don't base your entire podcast around that, because then you're not really giving people a reason to watch. I can tell you right now, like even the ones with the most sought after product, if that is what their podcast were solely about, I don't think it would be very popular. You may not actually do this for popularity reasons, by the way. I'm not assuming that anyone's starting a podcast because they want to be the next whatever the big podcast is right now. But if you are making a podcast because you're trying to sell your project bags or yarn or patterns or stitch markers or whatever you do, make that a peripheral part of your podcast. Like I myself, I did not start this podcast to sell knitting patterns, because I weren't making knitting patterns when I started out. I was teaching some classes and I had to make a pattern in relation to that, and then that kind of exploded when I put it on Ravelry. It became more patterns, and now I'm really trying to make knitting patterns, and I am using my podcast to get them out there, because I know people that watch the podcast are mostly interested in those patterns. But if all I did was going, so I have this new thing and you can buy this thing and you can get that here and I'm collaborating with this diary, you can get that yarn there. You don't want to watch an hour of product placement. So that's a bit of an advice I have for that. And I think I'm out of things to say. I hope this was useful for you. I hope you aren't too scared to try out, because I've given a lot of do's and don'ts. I don't think all of these things are priority things. If I was going to say a few things to take home, a quick summary: don't use too fancy equipment. Use what you have. Maybe invest in a tripod, possibly a handheld, but not really. Protect yourself, set up some boundaries, and be aware of what you share. I think that's the main thing that I have to say. And don't expect things to be a success overnight. You are not a failure if it's not a success overnight. Most people, most podcasters do not have a success overnight. But the ones that are initially very successful, relatively speaking, are so because they're already joining the community up on Instagram and on Ravelry. So I suggest making friends and start there, and don't be scared of starting a podcast, because even Scaredy Ellie does it, so you can do it too. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.